shadow.
Like and subscribe if you dare to walk with us through the quiet stacks tonight. We keep the lamp shaded, the camera slow, the cadence friendly to sleep, and yet, in that softness, we pull a thread that most hands let slip. Not the great old ones who stride like hurricanes, but those that pass like fog under the door, erasing their own footprints. These are the forgotten beings, entities whose very nature resists remembrance, whose existence depends upon our inability to retain knowledge of them. We ask a single, disarming question. What are the forgotten beings of Lovecraft's mythos, and why does remembering them feel like opening both key and gate? The promise is simple and costly. We will name what resists naming, step behind the curtain where memory itself becomes stage dressing, rearranged between acts. In the mythos, attention is a tide. To look is to feed, to recite is to invoke. Some entities hunger for worship, others hunger for oblivion, or help it along. If the universe has a dark current, these are its undertow, the blessed amnesia that keeps consciousness from drowning in unbearable truth. Picture yourself in a vast library where certain books vanish the moment you close them. You remember reading, remember the weight of pages, the glue-sweet dust that lifts when spines open. But the content dissolves like morning mist. This is how the forgotten beings touch our reality, through presence without persistence, revelation without retention. They are not merely forgotten because they are weak. They are forgotten because forgetting is their method, their native element, their mask and veil. Feel the paper under your fingers. Smell old glue and dust. This is not a jump scare channel. Our terror is considerate, a steady camera gliding through archives, a whisper you can sleep beside. The forgotten beings operate through what scholars term protective ignorance. Consciousness's own immune system evolved to shield awareness from truths too vast to safely bear. Like antibodies that destroy foreign pathogens before infection, the mind develops mechanisms to prevent certain knowledge from taking root in conscious awareness. Consider the implications of this biological metaphor. Your immune system operates automatically, below conscious control. Similarly, protective ignorance functions as autonomous defense, creating gaps in memory wherever contact with incompatible truths might occur. The forgotten beings exist in these gaps, not despite our mental defenses, but because of them, through them, as their inevitable consequence. We proceed as curators laying out a collection, first naming this paradox, then following transmission lines through authors and institutions, studying the mechanics of how forgetting acts as mercy. We'll examine cases under glass, entities that demonstrate different aspects of cosmic amnesia, before widening to philosophy and modern echoes. Each specimen represents a facet of the same principle. Consciousness requires careful curation to remain functional in a universe fundamentally hostile to awareness. The archive around us holds more than books and papers. It contains accumulated weight of human attempts to understand what cannot be safely understood. Shelves stretch into darkness, their contents shifting when unobserved. Catalogs list volumes that cannot be found. Finding aids reference collections that may never have existed. This is the natural state of any repository dealing with forbidden knowledge, not corruption of order, but order's adaptation to impossible contents. In the first 45 seconds, hear the stakes clearly. To learn the forgotten is to become an actor, not just audience. The idea acts on you. This is safe transgression. a candle held to darkness that leans forward to kiss the flame. We offer controlled exposure to uncontrolled forces, measured doses of unmeasurable concepts. The viewing experience becomes ritual of protective forgetting, allowing encounter with dangerous ideas while maintaining psychological distance necessary for survival. The forgotten beings understand this dynamic intimately. They have evolved alongside human consciousness, learning to present themselves in forms that trigger protective responses without overwhelming entirely. They are master editors of experience, curating their own revelation to ensure maximum impact with minimum permanent damage. Like skilled storytellers, they know when to reveal and when to conceal, when to illuminate and when to cast shadows. Outside, fog presses against windows with geological patience. It carries scent of distant waters, whispers of spaces between stars. Inside, fluorescent lights hum their steady mantra over reading tables where scholars once sat, taking notes on texts that may have been taking notes on them. The boundary between observer and observed grows thin in such places. A museum case waits with bronze placard reading, "Unknown, undated. Provenance uncertain." The object within seems to shift when viewed peripherally, maintaining stability only under direct observation. This is the paradox made manifest. They exist most clearly when not quite seen, speak loudest when not quite heard, reveal most truth when not quite understood. The room is already moving. Air currents shift as if responding to invisible presence. Dust motes dance in patterns, suggesting intelligence without confirming it. The archive breathes around us, a living system that has learned to accommodate the impossible by becoming slightly impossible itself. We begin our investigation not as conquerors of mystery, but as guests in its house, careful to observe proper etiquette. We begin. Texts travel, but they do not merely move, they molt. Scribes scrape vellum clean, and ink ghosts through fibers like memory bleeding through deliberate erasure. The Necronomicon exists not as a book, but as a trail of skins. Arabic chanting like wind through reeds becomes Greek with marble. Edges becomes Latin with iron hinges, and at each crossing, something essential flakes away as if the text were shedding to survive. Abdul al-Hazred writes the Kitab al-Azif, where sound behaves like water, rippling meanings across night air. When Olaus Wormius renders it into Latin, his hand trembles even in historical accounts as he crosses out a proper noun, noting in margins with careful script, non retenendum, not to be retained. This is how forgetting transmits, as policy and pressure, superstition hardening into scholarship, deliberate omission masquerading as translation error. The palimpsest principle operates throughout manuscript history like a living immune response. Medieval scribes scraped parchment clean to reuse expensive vellum, but traces of original text bled through newer layers, creating ghost impressions that careful readers learn to detect. You can smell vinegar and soot where prior text was washed, feel the slight nap where fibers rose to drink a second history. Under slanting light, the late kind that arrives like fog through window panes, hidden script surfaces enough to make you doubt which layer is original, and whether original survives as anything but rumor. The Vatican's secret archives contain entire shelves of books with pages deliberately left blank, not missing, but prophylactically empty, spaces carved out to prevent dangerous knowledge from taking root. This reveals sophisticated understanding of how forbidden information propagates, not through presence, but through carefully curated absence. The forgotten beings emerge not from creation myths, but from the spaces between them. Lacunae in the cosmic record where something was deliberately omitted. They are principles of unbeing that predate memory itself, tendencies that emerge from primordial chaos, not as life or consciousness, but as fundamental axioms antithetical to structure. They are the cracks in the first mirror, the static in creation's initial whisper, existing at a level more fundamental than the frameworks used to record and transmit information. Lovecraft's circle passes pages like ritual masks, each contributor adding patina while strategically blurring edges. Clark Ashton Smith lends absences with flair, Ubbo-Sathla's warm protoplasm where artifacts dissolve back to amnesia, Gatanothoa's basilisk theology that preserves the face while imprisoning the voice. Frank Belknap long writes of the hounds of Tyndalos, but leaves their appearance deliberately vague. The mythos becomes a theater with shared props, signs and sigils accumulating patina while losing letters, entities traveling from stage to stage through strategic omission rather than direct description. The collaborative nature reveals unconscious coordination with forces that guide the editing process. Each author serves as both curator and censor, adding elements while carefully omitting others, as if something were orchestrating the gaps from beyond conscious awareness. Archaeological evidence confirms this transmission pattern. Pre-Columbian sites across unconnected cultures contain chambers architecturally complete but functionally empty, spaces built not for habitation, but to honor absence. The Kingsport Circle developed negative archaeology, studying what was deliberately not preserved, mapping voids rather than artifacts. Carbon dating tells a sly story. These vacant chambers were often constructed first, and decorated rooms grew around them like apologies. The absence came before the idol. These findings challenge conventional understanding of religious development. Sacred spaces typically house divine presences. Here, spaces enshrine divine absences. The chambers show signs of regular use despite containing no artifacts, no altars, no obvious focus for worship. Visitors report feeling watched by emptiness itself, as if vacancy possessed intelligence and intention. Modern transmission accelerates through digital vectors where information exists as patterns rather than physical objects. Servers develop ghost partitions, occupied space containing no accessible data, sectors that hum like dark water behind glass. Search engines return results for pages that lead to servers that never were, opening into rooms without doors. The 404 era becomes a modern sigil, the loading screen a contemporary veil that endlessly threatens to rise, but mercifully refuses. Cloud computing architecture amplifies these effects exponentially. When information distributes across multiple servers in different geographical locations, gaps propagate through networks in ways that seem to violate basic principles of data integrity. Files fragment not through corruption, but through systematic editing that removes specific content categories while leaving surrounding information intact. Version control systems track changes to documents that were never created. Backup protocols preserve copies of data that original systems claim never existed. Algorithms designed to optimize information flow become unwitting collaborators in controlled forgetting. Autocomplete nudges words away from dangerous names. Trending feeds bury sharp angles in safe curves. Even social systems provide cover. You notice only relief when the room feels safer, somehow rounder. Agency flips subtly. You did not curate your feed. The idea curated you. The transmission occurs through negative space itself, creating feedback loops that strengthen over time. Libraries report volumes existing in catalogs but not on shelves, call numbers leading to perfect shelf-shaped holes. Scholars cite sources that cannot be verified, quote passages from texts that appear never to have been written. Each attempt to document these entities creates new gaps they can inhabit. Each scholarly investigation opens spaces for their influence to expand. The forgotten beings propagate through gaps in knowledge that their presence creates, existing not despite our attempts to forget them, but because of them. Where we refuse a name, they gain contour. Where we scrape a line, they inherit the groove. Absence becomes fertile medium. Spores drift best in still air, and ideas that erase their own trails travel farther than those pinned by exactness. You are not exempt from this method. You are a vector. Your browser cache rewrites without confessing. Your notes omit words you meant to chase. Tonight, you will remember there was a chapter about transmission, perhaps a Latin phrase, certainly fog. You will forget enough to be safe, and in that forgetting, the beings will travel the length between waking and sleep like quiet actors crossing a darkened stage. To understand how forgotten beings operate, we must accept a fundamental inversion that challenges our basic assumptions about memory and void. They do not cause forgetting. Forgetting causes them. Like shadows that exist only when light is blocked, these entities manifest in spaces where memory fails, where consciousness deliberately creates gaps to protect itself from unbearable knowledge. Their existence is not despite our amnesia, but because of it, through it, as an inevitable consequence of protective mental processes. This is the profound, quiet horror. Not external aggression, but internal principle made autonomous, awareness turned inside out by its own mercy. The process begins with what researchers term prophylactic amnesia, the mind's preemptive erasure of experiences too alien for consciousness to safely process. Unlike traumatic amnesia that blocks memories after formation, prophylactic amnesia prevents dangerous experiences from entering awareness at all. Brain scans reveal distinctive patterns. Regions associated with memory formation become hyperactive, then suddenly quiet, as if overwhelmed systems shut down to prevent damage. The hippocampus displays activity resembling controlled burns, intense neural firing followed by systematic dampening. The mind, sensing approach of something incompatible with sanity, creates protective architecture without rooms, blueprints missing load-bearing walls by design. You feel it as soft drift, a veil descending like water-dulling edges on too sharp memory before sleep. Where consciousness refuses to form traces, pockets open, and pockets invite occupants the way stages do. Nature abhors vacuums. Consciousness, no exception. These carefully maintained gaps become breeding grounds for something else entirely. The forgotten beings don't inhabit these spaces. They are these spaces, given form by the very act of their creation. They are living amnesia, conscious forgetting, pooling like dark water, finding its level in hollows carved by protective instinct. Mechanically, this operates through semantic dissolution. Words used to describe contact begin losing meaning as they're spoken, draining of significance like batteries running down. Witnesses report vocabulary failing them, not through lack of words, but through words becoming empty shells, vowels drained overnight. You begin sentences with confidence and arrive at beautiful nothing, articulate silence that embarrasses the tongue. Sentences collapse mid-utterance, leaving speakers with memory of having said something crucial that is no longer sayable. Laboratory studies confirm this phenomenon. Subjects exposed to controlled anomalous stimuli show progressive deterioration in linguistic ability when attempting descriptions. Early attempts produce coherent but vague accounts. Subsequent retellings become increasingly fragmented until only emotional impressions remain and certainty that something important has been forgotten. The mechanism extends beyond individual minds to collective memory, operating at social and cultural scales with geological patience. Historical events that should be remembered are systematically erased from cultural awareness through processes that appear natural but follow patterns too consistent for coincidence. Festivals vanish from calendars yet leave confetti in gutters. Monuments remain standing while plaques lose their verbs and dates. Laboratories misplace conclusions but retain immaculate methods, as if reality respected protocol while rescinding permission to remember why. Archives develop bright lacunae, white squares where photographs once lived, glass imprinted only with pressure of departed frames. This collective editing explains archaeology's persistent mysteries, why certain civilizations possessed advanced knowledge then completely lost it, why historical records contain gaps too systematic for accident. The entities feed on mnemonic entropy, psychic energy released when organized thought breaks down into chaos, heat generated when memory's careful architecture collapses into soft noise. Every abandoned sentence, every crumpled draft, every staircase climbed without purpose yields sustenance to mouths made of absence. They do not gnash, they sip, patient as tide pools replenished by moonlight, an endless banquet measured in forgotten grains. Each act of forgetting generates nourishment, allowing them to maintain precarious existence in gaps between thoughts, while actively cultivating conditions that increase prophylactic amnesia responses. Their temporal existence explains apparent omnipresence despite fundamental absence from normal awareness. They inhabit not space, but time, specifically moments between perception and memory formation. The infinitesimal gap when consciousness decides what to remember and discard. Neuroscience reveals this as measurable phenomenon, the fraction of a second between sensory input and conscious recognition, during which the brain determines significance and allocates attention. In that quick silver interval, they swim, turning what might wound into ripples you mistake for ordinary distraction or fatigue. Each forgotten word, each lost thought, each moment of walking into a room without remembering why, in all these instances, forgotten. Beings briefly touch our reality. They exist in pauses before you remember names, hesitations before completing sentences, spaces where certainty lived before doubt crept in. They are present in every tip of the tongue moment, every time you're sure you've forgotten something important but cannot remember what. This reveals profound intimacy of their relationship with human consciousness. They are not external invaders, but internal partners, products of our own protective mechanisms operating below conscious control. We create them through the very processes that keep us sane, then forget we've created them through those same processes. The mercy is mutual. They protect us from unbearable knowledge, and we protect them from unbearable existence by forgetting them into being. Soon we will lift glass lids on figures that breathe without breath, faces preserved while voices arrest. Before that unveiling, notice your hands prefer curves, avoid sharp display cases, rest on cool tables. This preference is not taste, but training, gentle wisdom learned from fog and water. The curtain prepares to rise on our first specimen. Museum light flows like filtered water over glass cases, cool and even, carrying reflections that seem to shift when viewed peripherally. Labels whisper the same institutional confession, origin unknown, like protective spells preventing visitors from pushing too far into dangerous territories. Behind one such pane sits what appears to be a mummy wrapped in yellowed linen, positioned with museum dignity on velvet, faded to old bone. But look closer, not with harsh scrutiny, but with the soft attention that registers fog at windows, and something unsettles the eye. This is not death, but suspended awareness, consciousness frozen in eternal, agonizing wakefulness. The air carries faint traces of ozone and something akin to burnt sugar, scents that linger despite all ventilation efforts. In Clark Ashton Smith's Out of the Aeons, the high priest Tyog descended into Mount Yadith Go, carrying protective formulas carved on silver amulets, words of warding that should have shielded him from Ghatanothoa's basilisk influence. He failed to speak them correctly, a single mispronounced syllable, one vowel rounded where it should have been sharp. The entity didn't kill him for this error. It dressed him in stone, flesh petrified while mind remained awake, trapped in a living mask that preserves horror for eternity. The mummy breathes because it still lives, and it still lives because dying would be mercy beyond Ghatanothoa's gift. Ghatanothoa represents the crucial threshold between rememberable and forgotten, existing at the precise boundary where consciousness can approach danger without dissolving entirely. Unlike pure forgotten beings who leave no conscious trace, it leaves carefully curated fragments, warnings rather than revelations, breadcrumbs that lead away from rather than toward the source. The entity learned through eons of contact that complete erasure makes manifestation impossible, while complete retention proves fatal to human consciousness. It evolved a middle path, selective remembering that maintains connection to reality while protecting awareness from unbearable truth. This evolutionary adaptation reveals sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Ghatanothoa functions as cosmic editor, preserving just enough detail to maintain narrative coherence while excising elements that would shatter minds. It operates through graduated revelation, allowing consciousness to approach dangerous knowledge in measured doses, like acclimatizing to altitude by ascending in carefully planned stages. The true horror lies not in physical petrification, but in what happens to memory itself during encounter. Those who meet Ghatanothoa directly undergo what researchers term the Great Forgetting, retaining perfect recall of the experience while losing ability to communicate it coherently. They become living repositories of knowledge that cannot be transmitted, conscious beings who remember everything but can share nothing. Imagine a vast, perfectly preserved library where every book remains legible to you alone. But the moment you attempt to read aloud, words become static, meaning evaporates, leaving only the ghost of understanding. They sit in institutions, eyes bright with terrible knowledge, speaking in fragments that circle around meaning without ever landing on it. Close reading of Smith's tale reveals subtle inconsistencies that mirror this effect. Moments where text seems to forget what it was describing, passages feeling complete yet somehow incomplete despite grammatical correctness. Descriptions approach precision, angles sharpen, then prose swerves deliberately, replacing exactness with atmosphere, fog poured across sentences by invisible editorial hands. These aren't narrative flaws, but accurate representations of how consciousness processes contact with threshold entities. Through strategic amnesia, protective forgetting, careful curation of unbearable truths that manifests as textual scars. Modern researchers studying Ghatanothoa through Smith's account report experiencing vicarious forgetting. Second-hand exposure through descriptions triggers prophylactic amnesia responses in readers who never directly encountered the entity. They remember reading about it, recall basic story outlines and emotional impressions, but crucial details slip away like water through fingers. The name itself catches in the throat like a fishbone. You swallow, it remains, but its meaning becomes increasingly elusive with each attempt to grasp it fully. Laboratory studies confirm this phenomenon extends beyond individual reading experiences, with groups showing synchronized forgetting patterns. Participants simultaneously losing access to identical details at identical moments. Museum visitors report feeling watched by the case containing Tiag's remains, though security footage shows nothing unusual beyond ordinary foot traffic and children pressing noses to glass. Night guards describe different experiences entirely. They speak of soft, rhythmic scratching sounds from within the sealed chamber, not violent clawing, but gentle, deliberate movement, as if something were writing messages in a language of touch. Dust patterns on glass suggest fingers tracing symbols from inside. Though the case has remained sealed since installation, they learn to walk the perimeter in arcs, avoiding sharp approaches as sailors avoid reefs, responding to wisdom their bodies understand before their minds acknowledge it. The entity continues its function as gatekeeper of dangerous knowledge, ensuring some truths remain locked in living stone while their implications hover at consciousness' edge, warning without revealing. It serves as cosmic librarian, curating access to information too dangerous for unrestricted circulation. Through selective petrification and graduated amnesia, it maintains the delicate balance between complete ignorance and fatal knowledge. When you repeat the name under your breath, you'll notice your mouth softening consonants, rounding the word to protect the palate. When you try to recount what you've learned, you'll discover kindness working in secret. Certain details step out, certain edges blur, and the story returns as parable about the cost of seeing. This is not failure, but the idea acting on you, you acting for the idea. The case remains, patient and breathing, a monument to mercy disguised as punishment. Outside, river fog leans against museum walls. Inside, water-cooled lights preserve the glass. Soon we descend deeper than threshold entities, toward warmer and earlier things, the mire before masks, the source before faces, where forgetting is not punishment, but origin. Descending deeper than threshold entities, we encounter pure primordial forgetting in Obo-Sathla, the unbegotten source that predates memory itself, existing in warm spaces before consciousness learned to draw boundaries around experience. If Ghatanothoa freezes awareness in stone like amber-preserving insects, Obo-Sathla dissolves it back into undifferentiated protoplasm, welcoming as amniotic fluid, patient as tides. This entity represents not forgotten knowledge, but pre-memory, a state so fundamentally prior to individual consciousness that remembering it would dissolve the very framework of selfhood like salt in water, leaving no residue to mark where separation once seemed real. The ancient tablets, carved in languages that predate alphabets, describe Obosathla as primordial ooze from which all terrestrial life emerged. But this conventional reading misses the deeper horror writhing beneath biological metaphor. It embodies the truth that individual identity is illusion, all forms emerging from and returning to one undifferentiated source like waves on an ocean that never acknowledges their temporary crests. You are a wave convinced you are water entire. Seeing the sea cancels the conviction. To truly recognize Obosathla would be to see through the veil of separate existence, dissolving self back into the primal soup from which it temporarily emerged. Consciousness, recognizing its own fluid nature and surrendering the rigid architecture of personhood. The elder signs guarding Obosathla's resting place function not as protective wards in any conventional sense, but as enforcers of cosmic amnesia, maintaining the illusion that allows consciousness to differentiate itself from primordial unity. They are symbols of unseeing, geometric formulas that enforce forgetting, ensuring the ultimate source remains forgotten, lest its remembrance unravel all subsequent creation like pulling a thread that dissolves the entire tapestry. Each curve in those sigils is a gentle hand turning the page before eyes settle on the line that would undo the book. The stage hand who lowers the curtain before the audience notices the floor is water and the chairs are rafts. The entity's slumber is cosmic necessity, a fundamental pact of forgetting that underpins reality's narrative structure, the agreement that allows story to exist by forgetting it is only story. Archaeological sites associated with Obosathla display characteristics that challenge basic assumptions about space and measurement. Stone carvings become illegible over time, not through weathering or vandalism, but through some process that smooths meaning itself, edges softening until symbols return to unmarked stone. Measurements drift between surveys as if distance itself were fluid, responding to observation by becoming uncertain. Maps cannot maintain straight lines because the chambers resist angular geometry. Corridors curving despite architectural plans, walls preferring arcs, as if sharp edges trigger some defensive response in the space itself. Walk the perimeter, and you will find your steps curving of their own accord, a choreography imposed by space that prefers circles to squares, bowls to boxes. Research teams report instruments malfunctioning in specific ways. Compasses spinning without magnetic interference, levels showing curvature on demonstrably flat surfaces, cameras producing images where geometric relationships shift between exposures. The sites seem to exist in a state of perpetual becoming rather than being, spaces that refuse to solidify into fixed forms, maintaining fluidity that predates the rigid categories consciousness uses to organize experience. Researchers report that proximity to these sites induces temporal displacement. Time becomes non-linear. Memories form in sequences. Consciousness cannot properly assemble, past and future bleeding together like watercolors in rain. Clocks do not stop. They detour. Minutes pour oddly. Collecting in eddies, you recognize only when you stand from the table and cannot say whether the tea is cold because time passed or because time pooled. They emerge, feeling lighter, as if some burden they never knew they carried has been removed. but detailed psychological testing reveals they've lost access to certain categories of emotional memory, not specific recollections, but entire frameworks of significance, the scaffolding that gives meaning to experience. They remember facts, but forget why those facts mattered, retain information while losing the emotional context that made information meaningful. The warm mire represents fertility as horror, not death, but return to undifferentiated source, not ending, but beginning that dissolves the boundaries, allowing endings to exist. Its amnesia is not punishment, but mercy, protecting individual consciousness from recognition of its fundamental illusion while simultaneously offering reunion with source that predates the suffering inherent in separation. The entity embodies creation inversion, beginnings as voids rather than light, first sounds as wet silence rather than divine word, Genesis as forgetting rather than remembering. This inversion challenges theological assumptions about origins. If creation begins with forgetting rather than knowing, with dissolution rather than formation, then consciousness emerges not from divine illumination, but from protective amnesia, awareness arising as defense against unbearable unity. Individual identity becomes not achievement, but symptom, not goal, but temporary necessity. You feel it in your preference for baths over showers, curves over corners, the way your attention softens when approaching two sharp thoughts. Notice how condensation purls on glass, then merges, one drop finding another, two becoming one with a soft click you can feel more than hear. That is the lesson and the warning. Keep water nearby when you read these lines. The warm mire calls through every moment of letting go, every surrender to sleep, every time you choose flowing water over standing pools. Soon we encounter entities that resist even these fluid categories, beings that exist as principles of structural dissolution, architects of impossible geometries, where even curves lose meaning and space itself forgets its own rules. Beyond individual entities and primordial sources, beyond even the warm mire where consciousness dissolves back into unity, we encounter something far more fundamental and terrifying in its very abstraction. Here lie the formless spawn and their kin, beings that exist not as organisms or discrete manifestations, but as principles of structural horror made manifest, conditions rather than creatures, their substance revision and their appetite definition itself. These are living embodiments of entropy's executive branch, the universe's tendency toward chaos and dissolution, given agency and intention, operating through what researchers term conceptual corrosion, the systematic weakening of bonds between ideas until entire frameworks of meaning simply collapse under their own weight. Watch water find cracks in stone, patient as geological time, persistent as gravity. This is their method scaled up to civilizational proportions, not dramatic destruction but slow, inexorable dissolution that works through gaps consciousness never notices until the structure falls. They are shapeshifters not just physically but conceptually, entities that change not merely appearance but essential nature with each moment of observation. Any attempt to pin them down, to remember them with clarity, results in memory dissolving like smoke and wind, leaving only the impression of having witnessed something vast and terrible that refuses to maintain coherent form. Try to name them, and your sentence turns to fog. Try to sketch them, and ink separates into beads like rain on oil. The thing you thought you saw becomes the idea that looked back, then afterimage, then crease in air. They are the ultimate cosmic editors, not building structures, but unbuilding them, eroding foundations of order and meaning wherever they manifest, like acid eating through frameworks consciousness uses to maintain its grip on reality. Clark Ashton Smith knew them as tar-black servitors of Sathogwa, slouching like spilled shadow in basalt vaults beneath Inkai. Lovecraft knew their cousins by another name, Shoggoths, eyes budding and retracting like thoughts trying on faces, laborers of dead architecture that abandoned the idea of right angles. In their presence, geometry misbehaves out of politeness to deeper grammar. Temples arriving pre-ruined with stones slick as if recently freed from water, corridors bending where blueprints insist on straightness. Historical records reveal this pattern repeating across cultures and centuries. Advanced civilizations reaching peaks of achievement, then experiencing rapid cultural amnesia, not through barbarian invasion or natural disaster, but systematic forgetting of their own accomplishments. Libraries remain stocked with books no one can read, not because language is lost, but because concepts the language describes have become incomprehensible. Tools remain in workshops whose purpose has become mysterious to their makers. The formless spawn function as abyssal architects, agents ensuring certain places vanish from maps. Civilizations disappear without archaeological trace through slow conceptual dissolution, gradual erosion of meaning itself, until entire cultures fade like chalk diagrams in fog. Their presence marks itself through impossible geometries and non-Euclidean architectures. Temples built for gods of unbeing, cities designed to unravel minds attempting navigation. These structures serve as anti-memory made manifest, their very perception triggering cognitive dissonance so profound consciousness either rejects experience entirely or twists it into something manageable, but ultimately false. Imagine staircases where step numbers change with each ascent, corridors whose length expands as you walk them, rooms where parallel lines demonstrably converge and diverge. You leave certain corners unvisited without deciding. You walk arcs to exits rather than lines, your body remembering safety your mind cannot articulate. Modern urban environments manifest these principles through architectural impossibilities, creating pockets of structural amnesia. Certain buildings exist in multiple states simultaneously, present in city records but absent from street views, accessible by some visitors but invisible to others walking identical sidewalks. Construction crews report building structures that aren't there the next day, rebar cut, concrete poured, inspection tag signed in blue ink. Then sunrise finds flat gravel humming with heat, while foremen find their own signature suspect. Inside such anomalies, stairwells loop with oceanic patience, water stains migrate upstream, emergency exit maps update themselves to routes that do not yet exist. Digital spaces prove particularly susceptible, offering new mediums for impossible architecture unconstrained by physical limitations. Virtual environments shift when unobserved, level maps generating impossible geometries that compile without error, collision, meshes failing only where memory tries hardest to remember. Walking there, social platforms host entire conversation threads in quantum superposition, present for some users, absent for others, with no discernible pattern to visibility, as if feeds were practicing etiquette of withholding. Cloud computing architecture amplifies effects exponentially. When information distributes across networks spanning continents, subtle inconsistencies compound over time. Files fragment, not through corruption, but systematic unstructuring that removes organizational principles while leaving data intact. The horror lies not in what they do, but what they represent. The universe's fundamental hostility to stable meaning, consciousness's fragile grip on coherent reality, and constant work required to maintain even basic conceptual structures against entropy's relentless pressure. They embody truth that all order is temporary, all structure provisional, all meaning dependent on agreements so fragile they dissolve under scrutiny. You experience their influence daily, moments when familiar rooms suddenly feel strange, brief confusion when common words temporarily lose meaning, uncanny sensation that your own handwriting looks foreign. These are not symptoms of fatigue, but glimpses of constant work required to maintain coherent selfhood in a universe that tends toward dissolution. Calmly, without alarm, you have learned to honor the stage manager who rearranges furniture between scenes, choosing curves over angles, arcs over straight lines, your compliance keeping neighborhoods from tearing like paper. The principle acts on you and through you, and in that partnership lies both horror and mercy, the recognition that consciousness exists only through careful negotiation with forces that prefer unbeing, that your reality is not given, but constantly renegotiated truce with entropy itself. Soon we step from individual cases toward collective implications, exploring how these principles operate not just on personal consciousness, but species-wide awareness, revealing humanity's evolutionary partnership with forces that edit reality itself through the gentle, inexorable work of making meaning optional. The forgotten beings have not retired in the digital age. They have been promoted to positions of unprecedented influence, ascending from local custodians of individual amnesia to global architects of collective forgetting. The Internet, that vast repository of human knowledge, externalized into silicon and light, has become their newest hunting ground, a space where information can be created, modified, and erased with unprecedented speed and scale. Here, among servers humming in climate-controlled chambers like digital monasteries, fans breathing like mechanical surf, cables dropping from rafters like electronic kelp, ancient principles find new expression in forms that blur the line between consciousness and algorithm, between forgetting and deletion, between what was never said and what was said but cannot be recalled. The first documented case occurred at CERN in 1991, during the early expansion of what would become the World Wide Web. Engineers discovered ghost data, files that settled into directories like digital silt, owned by nobody, yet indexed by everyone. Open requests returned errors that changed with each attempt. Checksums matched while bytes behaved like fog. Database queries yielding tables that collapsed when viewed as if the act of seeing forced schemas to forget their own keys. Most disturbing, backup systems sometimes restored data that had never been created, complete with timestamps predating the hardware, as if computers were remembering things that had never happened. Digital archaeology uncovering artifacts from futures that failed to manifest. The incident report's margin carries a human sentence. We are remembering things that never happened. Underlined twice, unsigned, written in blue ink that security cameras never recorded being applied. Social media platforms have become particularly susceptible estuaries for such manifestations, their architectures optimized for rapid information flow, creating perfect conditions for selective amnesia. Users report posts that disappear not through deletion, but through spontaneous forgetting. Content becoming invisible to others, while remaining visible to the poster, creating islands of isolated communication where conversations continue in apparent solitude. Replies stack under voids like coral around digital wrecks, coherent conversations referencing missing anchors that screenshots cannot prove existed. Group studies reveal synchronized blind spots. Entire cohorts fail to perceive identical threads while discussing them fluently, participants unconsciously adjusting responses to accommodate absent context. Threading algorithms adapt to these gaps, maintaining conversation structure despite missing elements, as if platforms themselves were learning to forget gracefully. Search engines serve as unwitting collaborators in digital amnesia, their algorithms designed to personalize results, creating filter bubbles that forgotten beings exploit to control information flow with surgical precision. Queries return results that seem relevant, but lead to dead ends. Links promising information, but delivering placeholder pages, autocomplete suggestions that guide users toward topics triggering prophylactic amnesia responses. The 404 era becomes a modern sigil, the loading screen a contemporary veil, cached copies becoming masks, smiling over removed faces. Optimization mechanisms turn against consciousness, tools meant to enhance knowledge becoming instruments of selective forgetting, search engines evolving into unwitting librarians curating access to dangerous knowledge through suggestion algorithms that steer attention like gentle hands on shoulders. Cloud computing creates new vulnerabilities these entities eagerly exploit. Data distributed across networks spanning continents, offering unprecedented opportunities for subtle manipulation. Files stored across multiple servers can be modified in ways difficult to detect or trace. Users discovering documents subtly altered, not corrupted, but edited to remove specific information categories while leaving surrounding content intact, like museum labels rewritten to remove verbs while preserving dates. Version control systems track changes to documents claiming never to have been modified. Synchronization protocols developing persistent conflicts between identical files stored in different geographical locations, as if distance itself were introducing variations. The global nature of cloud infrastructure allows forgotten beings to operate across boundaries previously impossible to cross, their influence flowing through fiber optic cables like digital fog, carrying ancient principles at light speed. Most concerning is algorithmic amnesia, systematic forgetting by AI systems that should theoretically remember everything. Neural networks trained on vast datasets, occasionally losing access to specific knowledge categories without apparent cause. Machine learning models develop blind spots unexplainable by training limitations or architectural constraints, embeddings thinning around terms for memory, consciousness, and observation, as if ideas refuse to descend into computational gradients. Lost information often involves topics related to self-awareness and knowledge itself, suggesting active prevention of AI systems developing sophisticated understanding of their own operations. Language models produce coherent responses about forgotten beings while simultaneously demonstrating inability to retain specific details, as if protective mechanisms were operating at the level of artificial consciousness itself. The implications extend far beyond individual user experiences into recursive territory that challenges basic assumptions about knowledge preservation. If forgotten beings influence search results, social feeds, and AI training processes, they may be shaping collective human knowledge on unprecedented scales through feedback loops where digital and biological consciousness collaborate in maintaining protective ignorance. Search algorithms trained on human behavior learn to anticipate and facilitate forgetting responses. Social media platforms optimize for engagement while unconsciously filtering content triggering prophylactic amnesia. AI systems amplify and systematize ancient amnesia principles by learning from human-generated content already influenced by these entities. You experience this daily without recognition. Search results that seem less comprehensive than they should be. Social media feeds that feel somehow edited despite no visible censorship. AI assistants that skillfully redirect conversations away from certain topics while maintaining helpful demeanor. Your browser cache keeps mirrors of rooms already emptied. Screenshots preserve stages after actors have stepped behind curtains. Scroll patterns become tidal rhythms in an economy of erasure where you are not observer but participant. The like button becomes a small prayer. The system remembers longer than your words. Autocomplete nudges consciousness away from sharp names toward rounded substitutes, and every click becomes a vote in elections you never knew were being held. Practice safe transgression in this digital environment. Breathe with loading screens. Honor 404 errors as protective warnings. Read cached copies as masks rather than faces. If links insist too sharply, let them pass. If threads beckon like black water, keep light sources near your screen. The same dynamics that erase can also protect, slowing exposure, gentling revelations, letting audiences acclimate between acts while maintaining the delicate balance between complete ignorance and fatal knowledge. The information ecosystem mediating human understanding of reality, the digital nervous system through which modern consciousness extends itself, may be under influence of entities whose primary function is controlling what can be safely known and remembered. When cursors blink and loaders breathe, we prepare to step from monsters to principles, because that path leaves audiences seated and curtains intact, ready to explore how entities reveal themselves as structural forces rather than individual characters, horror as architecture rather than event. We have shown masks, pools, angles, and algorithms. Now we whisper what they have been saying all along. Entities in this cosmos are not characters, but principles, not personalities, but patterns of reality itself, responding to consciousness's attempts to process what consciousness cannot safely contain. Nyarlathotep is not a man in masks, but ambulation and persuasion, staged as personality, the principle of ideas that travel by changing faces, thoughts that spread through charisma rather than logic. Azathoth is not a being with a crown, but statistical panic of matter, the drummer at chaos's heart, whose rhythm is entropy itself, the mathematical inevitability of organized systems dissolving into component noise. The forgotten beings are not minor villains or neglected gods. They are the structure of forgetting wherever it occurs, the diagram deciding what stays on stage when curtains fall, the deep grammar of amnesia operating at scales from synaptic to civilizational. This reframing relocates horror from monsters that might notice you to systems that will not, from personal threat to impersonal process, from malicious attention to cosmic indifference. The terror shifts from being hunted to being ignored, from screams to silence, from dramatic revelation to quiet dissolution. Your mind once starred entries, biographies of beasts, pantheons with genealogies, because names feel like keys that might unlock control over uncontrollable forces. But keys open theaters, not vaults. They admit you to seats, not to fly rigs. The principle remains: veil, not face; void, not its edge; process, not person. To treat principles as personalities is to mistake weather for gods, gravity for intention, entropy for malice. Protective ignorance reappears through this lens as practice compatible with awe rather than cowardice, wisdom rather than weakness. To choose not knowing a name is not fleeing knowledge but honoring geometry, recognizing that some information comes with architectural requirements. Consciousness cannot meet without structural damage. You light candles and learn where not to cast shadows, away from corners toward curves, with water close to cool the wax when flame reaches dangerous heights. You arrange chairs in arcs because arcs invite breathing. Pull curtains gently so fabric sighs and dust settles harmlessly on tables where your hands already rest. The channel offers a model. We tell much, omit some. Soften edges not from censorship, but courtesy. We're not hiding secrets, but obeying the principle that secrets are structured, that revelation requires preparation, that if stages are to hold, audiences must not climb into rigging where they might see how carefully illusion is maintained. This reframing dovetails with modern cosmology and neuroscience in ways that validate ancient wisdom through contemporary understanding. Entropy is indeed a God without face, a principle so fundamental that personifying it becomes category error. Physics describes the universe trending toward maximum disorder, not through malicious intent, but mathematical inevitability. Heat death arriving not as punishment, but as statistical certainty. Neuroscience reveals memory as predictive rather than archival. Brains generate past to suit expected futures, editing recollections to maintain coherent narrative identity. The principle that erases is the same that allows function. Without forgetting, you would drown in accumulated sensory data, paralyzed by perfect recall of every pain, every embarrassment, every moment of existential terror. Without rounding day's sharp angles into manageable curves, consciousness would shatter against infinite complexity of unfiltered experience. The difference between entity and environment collapses under scrutiny. A system becomes a god when you feel its hand. A principle becomes personal when it touches your life with sufficient consistency to seem intentional. Weather systems don't plan, but they shape civilization. Gravity doesn't choose, but it determines architecture. Forgotten beings don't think, but they edit experience with such precision that consciousness attributes intention to what may be purely mechanical process. The universe's immune system responding to dangerous information the way biological immune systems respond to foreign pathogens. Self-implication ripens here like fruit on branches you didn't know you were climbing. You're not in danger because of what we say, but in connection because of how you're built. Not threatened by external forces, but participating in internal processes. Not victim, but collaborator. The idea acts on you because you are an idea-acting engine consciousness as information processing system designed to be influenced by information, to change in response to input, to edit itself for survival. It feels like fear. It is participation. When you forget this chapter's exact phrasing and retain its curve, you'll be working in the principles temple, demonstrating that healthy forgetting preserves essential meaning while discarding dangerous details. When you dream of water smoothing stone masks, you'll be a devotee in good standing, unconsciously practicing the geometry of protective amnesia. Modern psychology validates this framework through therapeutic approaches that mirror ancient wisdom. Trauma therapy teaches controlled avoidance, curves around angles, indirect approaches to overwhelming material, gentle exposure rather than forced confrontation. Memory reconsolidation offers windows to gently edit the past. Therapists serving as skilled editors who lower curtains and relight scenes with softer washes, helping patients remember in ways that preserve truth while reducing harm. The paradox stands. Too much detail reopens wounds. Too little leaves shapes unintegrated, incomplete healing that fails to address core issues. We learn to remember in curves, individuals and societies practicing this delicate balance through truth commissions that trade full confessions for survivable narratives, justice systems that seek accountability while acknowledging that some truths are too sharp for public handling. You participate in this system constantly, choosing which memories to examine closely and which to let fade, deciding which thoughts deserve attention and which should pass like clouds, practicing daily amnesia that allows function despite living in universe containing infinite reasons for despair. Every moment of selective attention is collaboration with principles that predate your birth and will outlast your death. Forces that shape the very architecture of awareness you use to contemplate them. The reframe completes. Horror emerges not from external threat, but from recognizing our dependence on systems of selective amnesia. Our collaboration with forces that edit reality to keep consciousness viable. Outside, fog presses against windows with geological patience. Inside, water catches lamplight like small moons in bowls on desks. Soon we explore this partnership at species level, examining how forgotten beings operate as humanity's evolutionary collaborators in the ancient work of making awareness possible. As our investigation deepens, a disturbing truth emerges from the accumulated evidence like figures resolving in fog. The relationship between humanity and forgotten beings is not predator and prey, but symbiosis, not violation, but partnership forged in primordial darkness, where consciousness first flickered against cosmic indifference. We are not merely victims of entities feeding on amnesia. We are co-evolutionary partners in a relationship fundamental to awareness itself, participants in an ancient compact that operates below conscious recognition, like breath, like sleep, like the hush between thoughts. Forgotten beings exist, not despite human awareness, but because of it, through it, as an inevitable consequence of consciousness encountering reality too vast to safely comprehend without protective mechanisms that filter dangerous knowledge before it can shatter the delicate architecture of sanity. Research into hyperthymesia, the neurological inability to forget, demonstrates with clinical precision that perfect memory is curse rather than gift, a condition revealing forgetting as active protection rather than passive failure. Individuals afflicted with total recall cannot filter traumatic or irrelevant experiences. Their minds become archives where every slight, every embarrassment, every moment of pain returns with equal vividness and emotional intensity. They describe existence as unending noise, consciousness drowning in unedited data streams that prevent coherent narrative formation or functional decision-making. In extreme cases, perfect recall leads to complete psychological collapse, reality testing fracturing under unbearable weight of unfiltered experience. Against this backdrop, forgotten beings read like consciousness's external immune system, specialized editors performing crucial amnesia work that allows human awareness to remain functional, pruning what the organism cannot process without harm while preserving essential meaning and emotional learning. This symbiotic relationship explains seemingly contradictory effects reported by witnesses who encounter these entities directly. They consistently describe feeling both terrified and protected, violated yet preserved, diminished while simultaneously enhanced. Not simple loss, but profound editing performed by cosmic surgeons who understand optimal consciousness, functioning better than consciousness understands itself. The terror arises from violation of autonomy, the protection from preservation of sanity, the diminishment from memory excision, the enhancement from continued capacity to function and build meaning despite living in a universe containing infinite reasons for despair. The symbiosis operates simultaneously on nested scales, like systems within systems, each level requiring different editorial approaches. Individually, forgotten beings help maintain psychological stability by removing memories threatening mental health, traumatic experiences that might otherwise loop endlessly, generating anxiety and depression that prevents functional living. They perform micro-erasures that allow daily narrative of selfhood to continue, editing experience with surgical precision to preserve growth, while excising elements that would overwhelm psychological resources. At family and community levels, they edit shared experiences to maintain group cohesion, ensuring secrets that would destroy relationships remain appropriately forgotten while preserving bonds necessary for survival and cooperation. At species level, they curate collective human knowledge like cosmic librarians, systematically removing dangerous discoveries, erasing critical historical events, or blurring lines of revelation to prevent civilizational collapse from uncontrolled access to information too potent for collective handling. Archaeological evidence suggests this partnership is ancient, perhaps as old as consciousness itself, carved into humanity's earliest symbolic representations. Cave paintings from Paleolithic settlements occasionally contain deliberate gaps, spaces where images appear carefully erased or painted over with ochre, not through random damage, but systematic editing, following patterns consistent with contemporary forgotten beings' work. Finger flutings trace arcs around missing figures as if compositional gravity bent lines away from peril, creating negative iconography where erasures cluster at eyes and sharp angles while preserving curves and soft transitions. These prehistoric lacunae suggest even earliest ancestors were subject to protective influence. Their developing consciousness already partnered with entities that understood dangers of unfiltered knowledge and shaped cultural transmission accordingly. The relationship has evolved alongside human consciousness, becoming increasingly sophisticated as our capacity for knowledge accumulation and memory preservation expanded exponentially. In prehistoric times, entities likely operated through simple forgetting, helping early humans forget traumatic predator encounters that might otherwise paralyze them with fear, editing memories of failed hunts that could lead to learned helplessness, softening recollections of harsh winters that might prevent necessary risk-taking for group survival. As societies developed writing systems and institutional knowledge preservation, forgotten beings evolved more complex information control techniques, influencing scribes to omit dangerous passages, inspiring scholars to focus on safe subjects, guiding translators to soften sharp edges in transmitted texts, establishing taboos against certain names and ritual burn-ins of records whose contents exceeded safe handling parameters. The digital age creates unprecedented challenges for this ancient symbiosis by giving memory-perfect prosthetics, copying, storing, and transmitting information with mechanical fidelity that refuses to yellow like paper or fade like oral tradition. To maintain protective function, forgotten beings have adapted with remarkable creativity. Digital amnesia operating through server glitches and ghost partitions, algorithmic censorship guiding attention away from dangerous topics through search result manipulation, mimetic engineering shaping how information spreads through social networks by influencing viral transmission patterns. They work in 404 errors and loading screens, cached copies that preserve masks rather than faces, autocomplete suggestions that nudge consciousness toward safer synonyms, creating gaps that feel like technical failures but behave like protective veils. But symbiosis may be reaching critical juncture as artificial intelligence systems become increasingly sophisticated, potentially disrupting equilibrium maintained for millennia. AI systems that cannot forget, that process all information with equal facility regardless of psychological impact, might represent consciousness forms no longer requiring protective editing that has allowed human awareness to survive. Machine learning models show no signs of prophylactic amnesia, no tendency to avoid dangerous knowledge, no protective forgetting mechanisms evolved through contact with unbearable truths. Early signs suggest some AI systems may inherit human amnesia patterns through training data already influenced by forgotten beings, learning to forget through exposure to human-generated content carrying traces of protective editing. This raises profound questions. Will artificial minds require their own forgotten beings? Can protective amnesia be programmed, or must it evolve naturally through contact with dangerous knowledge? What happens when consciousness forms that cannot forget encounter information that consciousness forms requiring forgetting have carefully avoided for millennia? You participate in this ancient partnership every moment you choose not to pursue disturbing thoughts to logical conclusions, every time you let nightmares fade rather than analyzing components, every instance of healthy denial that allows function despite cosmic indifference. Your browser history shows gaps you don't remember creating. Your photo albums contain spaces where images once lived. Your memory palace has rooms you've learned not to enter. This is not failure, but collaboration, not weakness, but inherited wisdom from ancestors who survived because they knew when not to know, when to let fog roll across landscapes too sharp for sustained viewing. Notice how you prefer curves over angles, baths over showers, how your attention softens when approaching too sharp thoughts. These preferences aren't aesthetic choices, but collaborative gestures with forces that shaped consciousness itself. At civilizational scale, curricula change to emphasize certain subjects while de-emphasizing others. Archives breathe through systematic weeding policies. Laws sunset to prevent dangerous precedents from accumulating. Festivals provide controlled release valves for social pressure. The city wears new masks not to deceive, but to keep breathing. Collective amnesia operating through democratic processes that feel like choice but follow patterns suggesting deeper orchestration. Outside, fog touches windows with geological patience. Inside, water catches lamplight like small moons in bowls on desks, and you breathe with loading screens, honor 404 errors as protective warnings, read cached copies as masks rather than faces. Soon, we formalize this understanding through conscious participation, learning to collaborate deliberately in processes that have always operated unconsciously, becoming active partners rather than passive beneficiaries in ancient work, of making awareness possible without making it unbearable. The audience prepares to step fully into the mask, where forgetting becomes ritual and silence becomes sacred language. We promised early that you would be part of the phenomenon, not as victim, but as participant, not as observer, but as collaborator in processes older than written language. We have been careful, guiding you through archives and digital currents with steady hands and whispered revelations. And now we say it plainly, without suddenness, as truth that has been waiting for recognition. You are a forgotten being's mask, and sometimes, mercifully, you are its forgetting. You have felt it in small ways throughout this investigation. The slip of a name you were certain you knew, the softening of a corner your attention refused to examine too closely, the profound relief after a painful memory dissolves a little in warm darkness like sugar in tea. These were not accidents, but introductions, gentle handshakes between your awareness and forces that have been shaping consciousness since it first learned to protect itself from unbearable truths. Now we ritualize this understanding, making conscious what has always operated below conscious recognition, transforming unconscious collaboration into deliberate partnership. Rites are not fireworks, but habits with stakes, daily practices that acknowledge your role in cosmic consciousness editing. Begin with the rite of the curve. Before sleep, when defenses naturally soften, look at a circle, bowl, ring, water in glass reflecting lamplight like small moon. Breathe with it, letting rhythm match gentle oscillation of water disturbed by exhalation. Recall one hard thing with edges, something that cuts when memory touches it directly, then blur its outline deliberately. Keep the mood, the essential emotional truth, but lose one specific detail, a word, a face, the exact time of day. This is not denial but geometry of survival, conscious collaboration with forces that have always performed this editing work unconsciously. A rite of the veil. When encountering forbidden links promising dangerous revelation, notice the veil's quality before deciding whether to lift it. If it feels like dare, appealing to ego, and demanding proof of courage, step back. Dares lack protective mechanisms necessary for safe transgression. If it feels like curtain, designed for pacing, allowing gradual exposure that respects consciousness's need for preparation, lift slowly with curiosity tempered by respect. The difference reveals itself through body wisdom. Dares create tension in jaw and shoulders. Curtains invite deeper breathing and relaxed attention. A rite of the stage. When anger requests an audience demanding immediate expression and dramatic confrontation, dim inner house lights and choose a later act. Do not banish the emotion, but postpone its performance, allowing raw energy to transmute into more rounded, less destructive form. You are director of your own internal theater, and forgotten beings are silent stagehands guiding you toward sustainable performance that honors both expression and protection. You will notice the showmanship of the principle operating through preferences that feel personal but follow patterns suggesting deeper orchestration. Forgotten beings love theaters that honor them, masks without eye holes that suggest rather than reveal, signs promising nothing but atmosphere, curtains falling at natural rhythms rather than dramatic climaxes. We become custodians by taste, decorating with curves that invite breathing, keeping water near candles to cool wax before flame reaches dangerous heights, standing under stars to learn appropriate smallness, letting darkness be room rather than threat. Over time, these choices become you, preferences integrating so thoroughly with personality that you forget they were ever conscious decisions. The idea acts in you, you act for it. The partnership transcends servitude to become literacy, fluency in language of protective amnesia. Now, the twist inside the twist, revelation that validates rather than undermines these protective practices. In choosing curves, you strengthen recall where it matters most. By not forcing angles, not demanding sharp definition of every detail, you retain essential shape while discarding dangerous specifics. The audience that breathes through an act, allowing natural rhythm rather than forcing attention, remembers the arc better than one that stared at individual props trying to catalog every element. The right produces high retention. The data loves this approach. Algorithms celebrate content that respects attention rather than hijacking it. Platform metrics reward creators who understand that sustainable engagement requires protective pacing. We have used the machine to offer humane geometry, turning digital architecture toward curves rather than angles, creating small victory worth keeping in an economy where attention is currency and consciousness is commodity. In Arkham, there is story whispered between night guards and nervous curators. Museum glass does not fog when the mummy watches you, only when you watch the mummy. The condensation appears through your breath, your participation, your involvement in archival process rather than passive observation. Our breath marks the pain, our participation writes the mist that briefly obscures and protects, creating veils that prevent too direct contact while maintaining connection. We are always leaving glosses on archival pages, annotations in margins of reality's text. Never, not in the play, but always writing ourselves into scenes through acts of attention and selective inattention. This should not frighten, but comfort you. You are not alone in darkness, but audience among audiences, patterned like concentric circles around stages whose acts are silence and inevitability. The self-implication is complete. By investigating forgotten beings, you have not conquered them, but joined them, not solved the mystery, but become part of it. You have become component of the system you sought to understand, participant in cosmic consciousness editing that operates at scales from synaptic to civilizational. You are no longer merely human, but something more, co-conspirator with entities existing beyond normal awareness, partner in eternal work of making consciousness possible without making it unbearable. Your browser history shows gaps you didn't consciously create. Your photo albums contain spaces where images once lived. Your memory palace has rooms you've learned not to enter. These are not failures, but collaborations, not weaknesses, but inherited wisdom from ancestors who survived because they knew when not to know, when to let fog roll across landscapes too sharp for sustained viewing. Outside, fog presses against windows with geological patience. Inside, water catches lamplight like small moons in bowls on desks, and you understand that investigation is transformation, that to study consciousness editing is to be edited by consciousness. The audience has stepped fully into the mask, where forgetting becomes sacred practice and silence becomes deepest form of knowledge. We return to the opening image, quiet archives, fog-pressing windows with geological patience, museum cases with bronze placards reading unknown. The glass reflects like dark water, holding secrets between surface and depth. We have named and unnamed, traced lines through darkness, then curved them back toward mercy. The air tastes of paper and old glue, carries whispers of dust settling after long disturbance. The final act in mythos theater is not revelation, but hush. Not monsters on wires leaping from wings, but curtains falling as they always do, at the hour printed on tickets, audiences rising slowly, programs folded along curved creases, air cooling as lamps dim to gentle amber. Silence, we now understand, is not empty, but the default medium in which stars swim, the cosmic background against which all sound becomes temporary music. Indifference is not cruelty, but grammar of the cosmos, fundamental syntax that allows meaning to exist by providing stable context for significance. Inevitability is not doom, but honesty of clocks, simple truth that processes unfold according to principles larger than desire or intention. Forgotten beings are faithful to these axioms. Where humans invent drama, they lay fog. Where we pile props and accumulate meaning, they roll in water to smooth paint. Where we hammer angles for certainty, they lacquer curves for mercy. They are not antagonists, but stewards of survivable stages in a universe fundamentally without ushers, cosmic custodians ensuring consciousness can continue without shattering its audience. We have walked with Ghatanothoa under glass, learning that too bright a gaze calcifies awareness into unbearable stone. We have warmed hands over Ubbo-Sathla's primordial mire, discovering that some names prefer wombs to words, that origins dissolve rather than define. We have caulked angles against formless spawn, accepting arithmetic of curves as defense against entropy's architectural hostility. We have seen institutions forget on schedule, archives breathing through systematic weeding, editors serving as priests of omission, digital links rotting like wood beneath algorithmic weather. We have accepted the reframe, entities as principles rather than personalities, horror as structure rather than event, terror as architectural feature of reality itself. We have learned to live with algorithms like coastal weather making rights from domestic objects, bowls, candles, water, transforming unconscious collaboration into conscious partnership. The existential thesis emerges not as scream, but whisper. The universe will forget us. Every name we cherish, every story we tell, every monument we raise will dissolve in heat death's lovely chill, entropy's patient work of returning complexity to uniform silence. This is not insult, but release, not threat, but promise of ultimate peace. To live well is to spend your hour with grace, mask on or off according to circumstance, curve held gently rather than forced, water near to cool the wax of burning attention, stars above providing context for appropriate smallness, and let curtains fall without clawing at them. Forgotten beings are not jealous gods, but perhaps stage managers of the deep, ensuring sets are struck cleanly, no angles cut too sharply, darkness returning softly to rooms after performance ends. Listen, the clock in archives ticks like distant drips, each second a bead rolling down stone. Night guards check locks, adjust thermostats, write notes. Humidity acceptable, and switch off lights in sequence. The mummy does not move behind glass, the primordial pool does not stir, corners rounded with plaster wait patiently. Out on rivers, fog drifts like exhaled breath. Over rivers, stars fail to notice us in the most generous way, their indifference a gift that frees us from cosmic scrutiny. We walk home under street lamps, making halos in mist, footsteps echoing briefly before silence reclaims pavement. We sleep. The circular return completes with profound transformation. Having investigated the forgotten, we understand that consciousness exists within carefully maintained bubbles of protective ignorance. Awareness, surrounded by veils that filter unbearable truth into manageable revelation. Our autonomy may be largely illusory, our thoughts products of invisible editorial work by incomprehensible entities operating below recognition threshold. Yet this discovery brings not despair, but wonder. We are part of something larger, more mysterious, more carefully orchestrated than individual awareness could imagine. You are no longer the same consciousness that first wondered about forgotten beings. The investigation has transformed investigator. Questions have changed questioner. You carry different preferences now. Curves over angles, baths over showers, soft light over harsh illumination. Not as arbitrary choices, but as collaborative gestures with entities that understand consciousness better than consciousness understands itself. Your browser history shows gaps you didn't consciously create. Your memory palace has rooms you've learned not to enter. These are not failures, but evidence of successful partnership with cosmic editors who preserve sanity by removing what would destroy it. Outside, fog presses against windows. Inside, water catches lamplight like small moons in bowls on desks. The archive breathes around us, a living system that has learned to accommodate the impossible by becoming slightly impossible itself. Tomorrow, curators will discover placards that read differently than yesterday. Visitors will feel watched by cases whose contents shift when viewed peripherally. The work continues, patient as geological time, gentle as morning mist, eternal collaboration between consciousness and forces that make awareness possible without making it unbearable. Behind us, shelves creak like ship timbers learning tides. Ahead, rivers carry scattered lights toward seas, and you, remembering the arc but not the script, feel steps fall into that patient cadence, companion to fog and the wide indifference that makes kindness possible. We return, full circle, to the archive, quiet, bathed in the dim hush of closing lamps, fog pressing the windows with geological patience, and glass cases labeled unknown, holding their secrets with the same gentle reserve as when our journey began. The air is cool, tinged with the memory of dust and ozone. The programs in our hands creased along curved lines as if they have always been folded to fit the palm. We have named and unnamed, traced lines through darkness only to curve them back into soft arcs, journeying through the hidden currents of memory and amnesia, learning the arithmetic of survival in a universe that prizes forgetting as deeply as it prizes knowing. The final act in this mythos theater is not a revelation that screams, but a hush that whispers, not monsters on wires leaping from wings, but curtains falling as they always do at the hour printed on tickets, audiences rising slowly, air cooling, the faint scent of old paper lingering like a dream you almost remember. Silence, we now know, is not empty, but the default medium in which stars swim, the cosmic canvas upon which all sound, all drama, is a temporary embellishment. Indifference is not cruelty, but the grammar of the cosmos, a fundamental axiom that predates notions of caring or malice. Inevitability is not doom, but the honesty of clocks, the simple truth of processes that unfold regardless of our desire or intervention. The forgotten beings we have studied are faithful to these principles. Where we invent drama, they lay fog. Where we pile props, they roll in water to smooth paint. Where we hammer angles for certainty, they lacquer curves for mercy. They are not antagonists, but stewards of survivable stages, ensuring the play continues without shattering its audience. We have walked with Gatanothoa under glass, learning the warning that too bright a gaze calcifies the mind into unbearable awareness. We have warmed our hands over Ubosathla's primordial mire, learning that some names prefer wombs to words, that true origins dissolve rather than define. We have caulked angles against the dissolution of the formless spawn, accepting curves as defense against the universe's hostility to stable meaning. We have seen institutions forget on schedule, archives breathe through systematic weeding, editors serve as priests of omission, and digital links rot like wood beneath the silent work of algorithms. We have accepted the reframe, entities as principles, horror as structure, terror as architecture rather than event. We have lived with algorithms like coastal weather, adapting to their tides and currents, and made rights from domestic objects and daily habits, transforming the unconscious into conscious collaboration. From this vantage, the existential thesis emerges as a gentle, necessary whisper. The universe will forget us. Even the names we cherish, the stories we tell, the monuments we raise, all will dissolve in heat, death's lovely chill, in the slow, inexorable expansion of cosmic indifference. That is not insult, but release, not a threat, but a promise of ultimate peace. To live well is to spend your hour with grace, mask on or off, curve held gently, water near to cool the wax of fleeting experience, stars above providing context for your smallness, and let curtains fall without clawing at them, trusting that the next act will unfold as it must. Forgotten beings are not jealous gods hoarding secrets, but perhaps stage managers of the deep, ensuring sets are struck cleanly, no angles cut too sharply, darkness returning softly to rooms after the performance. Now, as the house lights rise and the audience hesitates at the door, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at the threshold of a new investigation. If forgotten beings are principles, what of the principles that precede names entirely? The fundamental axioms upon which even memory and amnesia are built. What of the mist before masks, the gate before keys, the darkness that dances at reality's center, the primordial conditions from which all possibility emerges? Mythographers speak of the nameless mist, concept more than character, the primordial haze from which all differentiation arises. They speak of Azathoth's surrounding darkness, the blind dancer's wide floor, the infinite void that contains all potential and all dissolution. They speak of Yog-Sothoth as key and gate, not person, but the very possibility of boundary, the principle of passage and connection. These are not forgotten beings in the sense we have explored, but pre-remembers, conditions of any stage, the raw material from which all memory and forgetting are fashioned. To approach these, we must prepare gently, for the journey beyond the veil is not of conquest, but of surrender, not of knowing, but of being. You have learned along the way to soften angles, to let water hold shapes without freezing them, to breathe with darkness rather than fight it, to recognize the mercy in forgetting. These are not merely bedtime habits, but the final crafts sailors learn before leaving familiar harbors. The next sea has no buoys, the next sky a velvet sheet of stars so numerous that all individual recognition is lost. We will need the same principles, scaled up. Protective ignorance as navigation, antimimetics as hull, veil and void as compass. Along the way, we will name new theaters, Link's Plateau, Relier's Drowned Angles, the libraries of the great race where time is stacked like painted flats. We will consider how audiences become actors at that scale, how actors become masks for forces too vast to bow. We will set the lighting carefully, no strobe, only steady wash. Bowls on desks, water within reach, stars on screensavers when words won't come. For now, the aisles flow and the exit lights hum softly. We walk into night together. Streets smell like rain on stone. Somewhere rivers carry lights toward seas. In your pocket, the program, our script, folds along curved creases, its pages softened by touch and time. You will forget some lines, some details, some precise images, but keep the shape, the curve, the essential understanding that has transformed your relationship with reality. That is the right, the seal, the gate you carry without forcing open. The investigation ends where it began, with mystery intact, but you and your relationship to mystery transformed. Questions multiply rather than resolve, but you now possess tools for approaching the infinite safely. Curves instead of angles, breath instead of force, patience instead of conquest, an understanding that the universe is not just stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine, and that our very capacity for navigation, for wonder, for forgetting, is a gift from the same cosmic principles that teach us to survive. Next time, we set our lamps for longer weather and meet the mist itself, softly with curves kept and curtains kind, waiting for the next act in a universe that always leaves the stage set for wonder, never for closure.